webinar is scheduled for about 45 minutes, and so we'll walk you through a number of things today. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly do some introductions. So my name is Paul Stas, Director of Sales here at Strongpoint. I'll be walking you through the presentation and demonstration today. On the line with me, I also have Amy Carlson, who is our Director of Customer Success, and Zurale Hernandez, who is one of our customer success leads, focusing more specifically on segregation of duties and continuous compliance. So we're already one step through the agenda here, but I'm going to start off by giving everybody on the line a very brief overview of the full suite of Strongpoint products. A number of you are new to Strongpoint, so what I want to do is just kind of help put the SoD and financial controls products into context as it relates to the broader scope of Strongpoint compliance solutions. So once I've given you that overview, I'll spend a couple slides talking in a little bit more detail about how we address the challenge of segregation of duties inside NetSuite. After those slides, I'll jump through a product demonstration, sharing with you some information about our rules, how they can be structured, how they can be used, share a couple of use cases, show you some assignments, visibility to a financial control, as well as some reporting. I'll save a few seconds at the end to talk you through some details on our implementation methodology, at least at a high level, to give you a sense of what this could look like and what the benefits to you are. And then we will save some time towards the end for questions and a little giveaway that we've got planned for everybody on the line. So without further ado, I will get started. So Strongpoint, for those of you that are new to us, this is really the full breadth of our offerings. Starting on the far left, we have our flashlight product, which is documentation only, really built for single user, single environment, where you just need a snapshot of the current configuration of your system. So all customizations, dependencies, critical settings, preferences, user roles and assignments, so on and so forth, done once. An extremely powerful tool, useful for really anybody running NetSuite. And we've got a number of great testimonials that attest to that fact. So next step up here is our full suite of documentation and optimization products. So you get all of the great benefits of Flashlight, but this is now updated automatically. So every day your documentation will refresh and pull together any changes that have happened that day and update itself. You also get a number of canned reports really to help streamline cleanup and optimization projects for those that are struggling with technical debt. And we have processes or methodologies built in to help you actually make the changes quickly and effectively with as little risk as possible. So really powerful tool. You've now got access with multiple users and really meant for those cleanup projects. Up into point number 3 here, our intelligent change management product, and this is really where you start to get some of the meat on the bone for Strongpoint. We're now helping you run a kind of full breadth of change management processes that are supported by tools. So you're able to implement automated controls inside NetSuite, change request and approval functionality, automated risk and impact analysis, environment comparison, to help you validate deployments or troubleshoot, and then industry-leading reporting. So lots of really happy customers with that bundle. And then up to the 4th point here, enterprise compliance. This is really what we'll focus on today. So I hope that helped kind of put what we're covering today in context of everything that we do. But today we'll be focusing on our native segregation of duties tools and access controls, as well as how we support those with our master data and financial controls. Moving on to the next slide. There's really 3 key components to compliance for Strongpoint. And for a lot of people, I think they think of segregation of duties as being strictly a financial audit related activity. And I mean, it is, right? It's an absolutely fundamental part of audit and compliance, but there's a lot more to it than just reporting on rules and assignments. Because if you think about it, this is also really a configuration activity. Because when implementing, you're either manipulating roles or the workflows or the controls inside the system in order to ensure that appropriate self-dealing doesn't occur, right? It's a lot more than just reporting on rules and assignments. And so, certainly segregation of duties analysis tools are important, but overarching change controls and processes that govern how things are modified inside the system is also critically important to maintaining segregation of duties on an ongoing basis without doing a lot of extra work. And that's kind of the key, right? Is how can you do this as efficiently and productively as possible on an ongoing basis? And really, like the benefit here is that our system documentation understands that certain things are also kind of fundamentally related to user roles, such as changes to forms or list views or things of that nature, right? So there's a lot of moving pieces here. And so for Strongpoint, it's really about segregation of duties, financial controls, and change controls. And these three things really work together because natively NetSuite doesn't really have a strong financial control system, and saved search alerts are great and they're easy to work with, but they don't log a lot of things that makes them auditable. And so Strongpoint has really extended those capabilities. And like I said, these three things really work together. SoD helps cover native permissions inside NetSuites, but then it's the financial controls that really take it kind of that next step, making it a lot easier to implement, not only because rules don't need to cover everything, and in some cases, they can't, but then also you don't need to make changes every step of the way. You can compensate where appropriate, and then the change controls really make sure that you're protecting, user roles, controls, and other configuration changes that could have an impact. So there's really kind of three keys to this for Strongpoint, and I'll likely be coming back to this theme throughout the presentation today. Couple other things that are key takeaways before I jump into the demo, and this is the last slide before the demo, I promise. So one thing to really pay attention to is that this is fully native inside NetSuite. That's important for a variety of reasons, but the one that I want to draw your attention to is the fact that you can now test in Sandbox and use normal NetSuite implementation methodologies to resolve issues and migrate changes, right? Not just about reporting on rules and assignments, it's also about potentially making configuration changes as well. The second point here is that this is integrated all at the employee record. So no new software to learn or manage, significantly increases adoption by you and your teams, easy to use, easy to understand, and again, enables you to use this effectively on an ongoing basis without needing to do extra work. The third thing that really want to draw your attention to, and we'll cover today, is the concept of blocking capabilities. So because we're native, we are actually able to block assignments, and this aligns really well with emerging compliance standards such as GDPR and other related privacy standards, where you need to be able to demonstrate that you have effective control over who has access to sensitive information in your system and who can grant access. And so our blocking controls really help you demonstrate that. The fourth point here is that sometimes segregation of duties are not enough, and that's why Strongpoint has them integrated with our financial controls so that you can help resolve contextual SoD, such as self-approval in some cases. And that's what really makes us, as I say here on the slide, like massively simpler to implement compared to traditional approaches. The final point, again, reiterating even some of the points from the previous slide, I did tell you that this would be a theme throughout, but this is all integrated with our other change controls. Changing objects inside NetSuite can put SoD at risk, and this is a stumbling block for many companies out there. Strongpoint helps protect your controls and really manage the full scope of what change management and compliance is supposed to consist of. So I hope this is starting to make a little bit of sense. I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint slide deck. I do have one or two left for later today, but I'll jump into a demo here to get started. And so where I'd like to begin is at our SoD rule list. So Strongpoint out of the box comes with 166 pre-created rules. These have been built thanks to a lot of hard work by our internal team, a lot of great feedback from existing customers, so thank you. And thirdly, input as well from external auditors. So a lot of thought has been put into these, and then you're not going to go in and implement all 166 of these, but we have best practices to share about how you can leverage the work that has already been done in a way that makes the most sense for your organization. So out of the box, 166. I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of a breakdown on the types of rules that we have. So drawing your attention, and this is the form that you would use to create a new rule. So you would provide a high-level overview, name, description, and a memo. If you've got a list of risks that have been identified internally or by your auditors, you're able to put them in our system and populate them here so that, in case of a violation or during, review at a later date, you're able to understand, okay, this is why this rule exists because of that risk. And so now looking down a little bit further, we have what we call permission-based rules, and this is kind of what the finance folks in the room would typically think of. So we have two-sided, highlighting that for you, two-sided permission-based rules, and this is very simply, if you have permission A, you shouldn't also have permission B. Okay, and so a primary example, and I'll refer to this one a few times, is you can't have the permission to create a journal entry and the permission to post a journal entry, because then you can create and post your own. And so that is an example of a two-sided permission-based rule. What you would see if assigned would be like a violation. You can choose to block this, more on that shortly, but most of the time for two-sided rules, that won't be required. What we also have is what we call one-sided rules for permissions. So this would be things like setup based permissions where, regardless of the role that it exists in, you probably don't want to be handing out those types of permissions without a pre-approval. And so regardless of the other roles or permissions that you have, you can't have this one unless it has also been pre-approved. We do see in a lot more cases organizations choosing to block these types of one-sided permission-based rules just because it is such a critical level of access. So I've covered two so far. There's two-sided, there's one-sided at the permission level. We also have one-sided role-based rules. And so you can think of this as like an uber one-sided permission rule where it's at the entire role level. And so you'd see this here for things like the administrator role as an example, and that is very commonly blocked. So we would check this checkbox up here so that it actually could not be assigned to someone without a pre-approval or an approval inside the system. So those are kind of the different rule types that we'll cover today. So jumping back up into our rule list, I'm going to show you two in more detail. The first one will be the admin and full access rule. And so this is a one-sided role-based rule with a blocking control in place. And then the second one that I'll show you is our journal entries rule. And this is the example that I just mentioned where users who make journal entries cannot also approve them. So this is a two-sided permission-based rule, and this one will not have blocking turned on. So jumping in, again, we try to kind of streamline this interface as best as we can. So you're seeing that it's the administrator and the now deprecated full access rule, blocking control is turned on, and it's linked to this risk, which is just purely controlling for access to admin permissions. The second one that I'll show you here as an example is our journal entries rule. A little bit more information here, different levels of permissions can be selected. We've linked it to a number of different risks here. And so this is a two-sided permission-based rule, and we don't have the blocking conflict enabled in this particular case. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is jump into the employee record, and I'll show you what this looks like when actually being assigned. So we've got our friend John Smith here. You can see currently that his SoD status is clear. Okay, now if I hit the edit button, what this is now going to do is open up. I can actually preview SoD violations if I'd like, but in this particular case, for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to jump right down in here into access. And you can see that he currently has a controller role. I am going to assign our administrator role for him. So you would think that that would be a pretty big deal if we're handing that out. It does violate the control that I showed you earlier, and we do have blocking enabled. So I'll add that and I will hit save. And so what Strongpoint is now going to do is run a quick check to see, is there a blocking control in place preventing me from doing this? It very quickly saw, yes, there was. So we got an alert here that says, in order to grant this role to John Smith, you need to obtain an approval. the SOD rule that is being violated is this one. This is the description, and you're able to customize some of this when building or editing one of our rules. And then you have the option right here to request for an approval if you'd like. I'll click yes. I'll say, because John is a great guy, exclamation mark. I'll hit OK. It's going to take a split second. It's going to submit that. It's now creating a change request inside Strongpoint, letting me know that my approval change request has been submitted. And so now you can see that it has saved, but the administrator role, which I added and saved, has not actually been put onto John's employee record. What I can see here is that the SOD status is currently clear still, because there's no violation that has actually taken place, right? There's no administrator role here to be concerned with, but what has been added is an SOD approval request. So I can see here that I have submitted a request for approval to add the administrator role to John. And the appropriate people have been notified based on the rules that you've set up inside the system. And once approved, the administrator role would automatically be assigned to John's employee record for me. Okay, so great way to prevent unauthorized access, but then a really efficient way to process that approval and have it put in place quickly and effectively. Important note here is that you can do this ahead of time as well, right? If you're planning to assign administrator access, you can create the change request before the initial assignment. Strongpoint will recognize immediately that the approval is in place. It won't block it, it'll save it, and you'll be able to go on doing your business like you normally would. Okay, so that is an example of how a one-sided role-based rule with blocking controls works. Second example I'll show you here. I'm going to edit this again. We saw earlier that John has the controller role. Let's say I go in and I add this second controller role, which has a different set of permissions within it, and I hit save. So Strongpoint, again, it's going to check to see if there's a blocking control in place. We saw earlier when I was showing you the role that for this particular two-sided violation, there is not. And so what you're now seeing is that it has saved it because there was not a violation in place. So John has access to both. And you can see that the SOD status here is in queue. If I go ahead and refresh my browser, doesn't take long, says it's processing. I'll go again one more time. So we're now seeing that there's a violation here. So this says users who make journal entries should not have the permission to approve journal entries, which is the description of the rule that we looked at earlier. And if I go down to the access subtab here again, I'm now seeing that there is an unresolved incident for John, right? So there is a violation that is currently in place. It has not been reviewed. You have not submitted an approval request or anything like that. This is an active violation. So there's a few ways that you'd be able to clear this, right? I alluded to creating change requests and getting approvals. What you can also do is go back in here and edit it, right? Like, oh, I made a mistake. I thought that this was going to be okay. Apparently it wasn't. So I can go back in. I'll take away John's access. He may be upset about that. I'll hit save. And so same idea, right? Strongpoint will run that very, very quick check. And what you're now going to see, and I'll just let it finish processing again. Might take a refresh or two. Oh, so we're now seeing that this is clear again, right? So John no longer has a violation, but he now has a resolved violation. So we still keep track that that violation took place. We just will show you that it was resolved by removing access to the role. And so it would give you a different kind of output depending on how the resolution actually took place. And we would give you a certain status of it. And that really builds into your ongoing reporting and active management of this. But really just by being at the employee record, you're able to manage the vast majority of it really quickly. Okay, so that's now two examples. The first one being a one-sided role-based conflict with blocking. The second was a two-sided permission-based rule. So two different roles, two permissions within them that conflicted without blocking. Showed you a couple ways to clear it. But in the real world, sometimes segregation of duties rules like that, unfortunately, just aren't enough. And so that's really where, and I was alluding to this earlier, right? That's where our financial controls come into play. So keeping on with the example of creating and approving your own journal entries, we have a agent control list. So similar to the SoD rule library, we also have a list of financial controls. And so in the real world, you may need to have access to both of those permissions, and you just don't ever approve your own. You approve your counterparts, or you know, your more senior level executive, and you have permission to those things. But it's still critical that we recognize that that is a risk, and that we have a compensating control in place for it. And so in this case, we have a pre-built compensating control, journal entry created and approved by the same user. And if I was to open that up, what I'm now seeing here is a you know, simply a saved search that's being converted into a detective control, kind of like you would see in other major systems, where when a control where a control is violated, it'll log that immutably, and you'll need to clear it in order to resolve it. And so this is much better than just having a saved search alert in place, because it's all documented inside NetSuite. Massively efficient, right, compared to the other tools, and much simpler or more efficient way to pass audit. And so here we've created a search as an example where the person who created the journal entry is the same person that approved it. We can set what we want it to do when it's violated, such as logging or tasking or storing the data in a PDF file, or counting the number of times that it's taken place. And even actually for many of our standard controls, we can also implement blocking controls here as well, right? Really, really useful tool for really critical things. Now, another key advantage over using saved searches is that, you know, you can see that the alerts over here, that these can really be customized to send to, say, an owner of a business process, or a supervisor, or the control owner, and not necessarily only the owner of the saved search. And you can change these in bulk if required. Again, you know, producing a very efficient workflow. So kind of similar methodology to what I showed you in terms of unresolved and resolved incidents at the SoD level. Same thing goes for our general controls as well, same methodology. So here you're seeing a consolidated view of all violations of multiple different controls, all into one view. And then you'd be able to drill down into each one of these areas if you needed to, go off and resolve, check off, or, you know, you could even download a list of violations as a CSV file for inclusion in an external GRC system or anything like that, kind of depending on your own internal requirements, right? So, you know, lots of detail available here for you. The beauty of it is that once set up, configured, these are running automatically in the background, so that you can, you know, operate very efficiently on a go-forward basis and always be ready for audit. So I'm not going to go into this in much more detail. Just wanted to quickly show you what an unresolved SoD incident report would look like. You know, time-stamped, date-stamped records, details of the assignments and the violations that took place. And then we have tools built in to help you, you know, review and resolve in a very quick, very efficient way. So for example, closing them off, linking them to change requests, giving detailed overviews of resolutions. You know, most organizations will manage this differently. Some of them look at it very frequently, you know, daily or at most weekly. Others are looking weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. It really depends, but again, I'll come back to the idea that this is extremely efficient. It's all being done automatically for you in the background. A lot of self-serve tools for a variety of different people inside your organization, tools for both IT and finance to effectively manage, you know, really the end-to-end change process, like I mentioned earlier. So really important question is, you know, what does implementation look like, right? How can we get this set up? How does it work? And ultimately, it's a little bit different for everybody. And that's, I think, the beauty of our tools, is that they can be customized as needed. But our implementation methodology ultimately is designed to get you up and running and compliant as soon as possible, with as little work as possible, as funny as that sounds. And this is really where our ability to understand user roles, assignments, all of their dependencies is absolutely critical in getting this job done quickly. Again, because of the sandbox, we can know for sure before we deploy any changes or any new roles into production that things are going to work properly. And then when we migrate any necessary changes to production, we're doing so with appropriate approvals prior to even really setting our approvals live. So in production, we have a very clean and clear implementation of segregation of duties. And maybe a closing comment, if you will, but keep in mind here that the beauty of Strongpoint is that you don't always need to change roles, and you don't necessarily need to implement every SOD under the sun in order to be compliant. You really can work in a combination of changes to roles, SOD rules, and financial controls so that you can move forward with this, be compliant quickly, effectively, and manage it on an ongoing basis in a very productive way. So that is a quick overview. I am going to take a deep breath, and I am going to click onto the next screen. So to thank everybody for their time today, wanted to offer you all a free 6-month trial of our Flashlight product. So when I went through that initial overview of the full scope of our compliance tools, Flashlight was the one on the far left, an extremely useful tool for every organization running NetSuite, automatically documents all of your customizations, giving you visibility to all the dependencies, helping you make changes quickly and effectively. Follow up with us, let us know, we'll follow up with you. We'll make sure that you have access to a link to get this downloaded, but free 6-month trial for you. Thank you for joining, we appreciate it. And before closing off, I wanted to open up the floor and see if there were any questions, give everybody kind of time to submit that into the chat box or the Q&A tool down there, and we'll be happy to answer any of them that come up. So while I take a deep breath, we'll see if anybody drops any questions in there for us to answer.